So I want to now move on to our next keynote speaker and introduce Katherine Ainley, who is CEO of Ericsson in the UK and Ireland. Thank you once again, Katherine, for your support of today's event. We look forward to your insight into the state of connectivity in the UK. Katherine.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Julia. Good morning, everyone. I'm Katherine, as you just heard. So I'm the CEO of Ericsson in the UK and Ireland. And delighted to welcome you all to this virtual summit to explore the network future. I thought I'd take us down a little bit of a memory lane to start with, and I often reflect on technology and kind of even in my lifetime, how it's changed and the pace with which we've moved on in the last half a century. And as I was thinking about today, I was thinking about my father, my dad. He was the first in the family to go to university. He studied maths. And when he left, he ran a forecasting team for a factory. And he had one of the very first computers in business. And we all have seen these pictures and have thought of this world, but that computer took up a whole room. It only printed on green paper with little holes in the side. And he used to bring home that paper for me to draw on. And I think I reflect and think, this is 50 years ago. But that completely transformed the ability for that company to forecast its supply chain and the materials that it needed. And how much we've come on in the last 50 years is just amazing. I look at my children, they're now at school. So I've got two children who are 8 and 11, two girls. And their life is full of technology, from smart boards at school to the tablets that they use in their lessons to my youngest doesn't have one, but a phone that they carry, which when I reflect has so much more processing power than that computer that my dad had in his room in that factory. So, just an amazing amount they've come on with. And what we use that technology for with our children is also amazing. They've carried on with their schoolwork during the pandemic. I generally know, particularly my eldest, I know where she is, what she's doing. I know when she's on her way home from school. And, I can use that technology to help keep her safe. But then I reflect, and I guess the purpose of today and why it's quite exciting is, what's the world going to be like when they go to university? And sometimes I think, what about their children? And what's it going to be like for them? And we talk lots about self-driving cars and autonomous parcel delivery and maybe fridges that shop by themselves, maybe even cook for you. But then I think the bit that gets me really excited, and since I joined Ericsson 7 months ago, the really hot topic of conversation is that world of work and how much that is going to change. And I reflect on, the idea that you would travel, I think, for a single meeting, or that you would carry out a really long or hazardous journey, perhaps to an oil rig or a remote location to do a single short visit, or perhaps carry big packs of paper or plans or documents, already feels a little bit odd to us, but for our children, that will be the most bizarre and wasteful concept, I suspect. They'll have that super fast, low latency connectivity wherever they are and whenever they want. And that's really quite amazing. But they'll also need it because as climate change really becomes a reality, the way that we live and we work just has to change. And I guess what gets me so excited is 5G and technology is going to be the enabler that starts that revolution. So technology is going to change the world we live in. That's my little trip down memory lane and a little bit of a glimpse into the future. So what I'd like to do then is dive into a little bit more, some of the big themes, look at some of the changes that technology might bring in our view, and then move on to what do we need to do to make this happen, and specifically what that means for the UK. So firstly, we spend quite a bit of time reflecting on that world at large and look at a number of factors within that. And we see that socioeconomic volatility coming up to the forefront. And I think technology brings opportunity, but also disruption. We're going to see AI and automation improving that efficiency, but it's also going to remove whole groups of jobs. And with that, provide lots of opportunities and new forms of employment. And we've already seen in the pandemic how quickly and easily those divides and social gaps can widen in situations like that. But with planning and forethought and investment, technology can also be the key way to close those gaps. And then I think if we look more broadly on a global scale, we see a pattern of fragmentation, and we see some countries beginning to retreat from that global community. And I guess one of the asks of today, or one of the things to think about, is we must continue that development of those global standards and work together to make sure that the future of digital infrastructure and investment and innovation continues. The second area I thought I'd touch on was around harnessing the discoveries and the habits that we've changed over the last 18 months. I mean, it's super strange. I'm stood in my study giving a speech virtually. I've changed jobs in the last 7 months without pretty much meeting anyone for most of that 7 months. And it's very much that world that we've come to live in. I think also working in telecommunications, I came from an operator. It's been a real honour to witness firsthand the response from the industry in terms of keeping the UK connected at this really critical time. But what it's also done, the pandemic has shown how much the world's changing and how those different forces will shape our future. There's been loads of negative experience, and as I touched on earlier, some of those social gaps have widened, but we've also seen some of those exciting opportunities come through. So another question for today, which I know you're going to talk about, we're going to explore, is that question of how can we nurture that innovation to accelerate the economic rebuilding, whilst avoiding as many of those negative impacts as possible. I think the need for that human contact will always be there. And we're now seeing millions of people comfortable with that virtual contact because they've had to become comfortable with it. And that opens up a whole new world of possibilities for how and where we celebrate, connect and work. And I think, certainly for me, and I'm sure for many of you, you reflect and realise how much time and resources we've wasted travelling for meetings, and how in the right place that connected world can be much more efficient and safer and remove some of those barriers and inequalities that have constrained some people. And then thirdly, what the factor that I wanted to touch on was a redefinition of trust. So, a hot topic around the explosion of cybercrime and how personal data is used has raised lots of concerns about interactions with the digital world. And technology is partly the cause of this, but it is also the solution. And I think, what we must do is understand the shifting nature of that trust and how it's earned with customers. And if technology is to become the backbone of that new connected world, then we need to ensure that it's trusted and secure for everyone. Finally, and I touched on this before, but technology is a key lever to tackle the urgency of that climate change. And, passionately, this is the critical issue that's going to dominate our next decade. The impact's already clear, from those shifting weather patterns that threaten the food production, to rising sea levels, to that risk wide-scale flooding, mass migration, population change. Again, when it comes back to our children, I think about this a lot, and many of these impacts will be irreversible if we don't take drastic action. So all of those trends, those 4 trends, and there are many more, will influence our world, and we need to balance our innovation with them in mind. But then what I'd like to do is move on to what does that mean for our industry, and how is that technology actually going to change the way that we work? What does it really mean for our children, your children, and importantly, their children? And I think I'll start by saying that we see that innovation and acceptance of that new virtual world will see connectivity in everything as we go beyond the smartphone, because the smartphone has dominated the last 10 years or so. But if we move forward, we can imagine this world where your contact lenses display an augmented reality content, or my earbuds that might translate for me in real time. And we can expect to see that continued evolution of those wearable technologies that can realistically emulate a whole spectrum of senses, be it touch or smell or sound. And if we talk about that in real life, we're already using drones and 3D technology at Ericsson, which means we don't have to send people out to sites. So if we're working on a really remote radio site, we can send one person with a drone, and then we can work remotely in almost real life, in that augmented reality life. And our enterprise partners are using virtual reality to be able to work on the same piece of equipment from different sites, or augmented reality to be able to see cables and pipe work overlaid on the street ahead of us. And then you turn to product development and manufacturing, and I rewind to my dad and his room of computers to help him with a little bit of forecasting. But today, that world of manufacturing has moved on again, and we look at how we can create digital twins. But imagine if that replica of digital twins could replace CAD drawings, prototypes, models of any complex product to form this connected, virtualized system of product design and realization. And then finally, close to home, we had a bit of a taste of homeschooling. I was not immune from that during the pandemic. And I guess that showed us that the quality of that education could be really variable. I heard some absolutely amazing stories of homeschooling, of children who did fantastically, had amazing experiences. But sadly, we also heard the stories of children who missed out for months at a time. And I guess if we can imagine a world where that quality education wasn't dependent on how close you were to a school, but instead, if every child or every adult had access to that personalised virtual learning environment that could complement classroom education. And then, and I know this is a subject for today, but you can get really excited when you overlay AI onto this and that opportunity to improve lives and sustain the planet. So how do we do this? Because that's the dream, but how do we actually do it? And I guess most importantly, we need to create the connections and the networks that make the unimaginable possible, as we talk about. And the mobile networks of the future will need to have certain core attributes that allow them to become that platform for this innovation. Networks are going to need to have full global coverage for wireless communications. They're going to need to be capable of managing extreme and dynamic performance in terms of those data rates, latency. They're going to have the capacity to handle trillions of embedded devices, from little tiny sensors to devices enabling multi-sensory immersive communication. And then to be deployed at that scale, the networks are going to need to be operated with virtually no human intervention and touch. So that's, again, using AI to make sure that we've got the appropriate service availability, that they're energy efficient, and that the network itself becomes cognitive. It learns and it adapts, it makes decisions, and it solves the problems itself. And then we need to take that network of the future on beyond that and extend it with new technology and capabilities, managing risks in the network and using AI to predict and respond to those threats in real time. And what does it mean for those mobile networks? They're going to need to evolve from those classical architectures to a model where complex and real-time processing is distributed, it's integrated throughout the network. It'll need a multi-cloud model, and it'll embrace innovation in areas such as quantum computing. And most importantly, I know this will be a big subject again for today, we're going to need to work with new partners such as startups with new ideas, whole industries that can be transformed through connectivity, international organisations who inspire and support new ideas, as well as the government, so thank you, Julia, and regulators who stimulate and regulate responsible development. And then bring it a little bit closer to home for the last section that I want to talk about, which is what does it actually mean for the UK? So our organisations, across all of us here, create that employment and the innovation and potentially the opportunity for risk, be it insecurity or whatever. But the wider impact that we have on the innovation that we enable is huge. So what do we have to do to make that innovation happen and to make that impact? And I guess here are some examples that I thought of. So the arrival of that connectivity in everything will necessitate the need for new networks of limitless connectivity, be it coverage, speed, capacity, and low latency, and they'll all be expected as a minimum. The networks will need to be continually optimized for AI, for processing in the core, for the edge, and for everywhere in between. And I think really interestingly, smartphones will no longer be that dominant device of connectivity. So we're expecting to see that explosion of new consumer device formats where everything is connected. And the key thing is all this needs to happen while we break the energy curve to make sure that we minimise the negative environmental impact. So to that, make sure that we reduce the impact, the negative impact that we have on the world around us. And a really good example of this is we recently partnered with Vodafone, and we've managed to halve the network energy consumption in a breakthrough 5G trial in London, so it can be done. And then really focusing in on the UK, I guess one thing that I'm really keen on is that we learn from the mistakes of the past and that we really take the lead in that global connectivity. The UK was one of the first countries to launch 5G commercially, but we have seen that pace of deployment slow. And less than 10% in the European Union and the UK are covered by 5G mid-band network today, and that compares with 5G mid-band coverage of more than 90% in South Korea and 46% in Switzerland. It also means that our region then trails behind countries including Australia, China and the US on mid-band availability. And we think this is key to making the most of 5G. It's great news that BCMS have today issued that call for evidence to understand the detail of future wireless connectivity in the UK. And we need that policy and regulatory framework to encourage limitless connectivity. We've also got to really consider the benefits of connectivity for new businesses and industry, from enabling Ford to become that first automotive centre in Britain to have state-of-the-art 5G technology in smart ports at Felixstowe and Belfast. The test beds, trials and 5G use cases that Julia referred to have broken really new ground, but now we need to go beyond those trials and take it on another level. I think we've proved that low latency connectivity can really revolutionise all types of business operations. But let's take the next step. Let's unlock that full potential and get its efficiency gains and realise the return on investment for those billions of pounds worth of return on investment. And finally, we need to use that network for the future and build it on the next generation. So we've got to prioritise our research and development. AI, cloud, security and new technologies will all be critical to that. But the next generation also means making sure that we've got the skills and the investment in jobs and education that can keep the UK on that global map as a network leader and make sure that no one gets left behind. So I'm really passionate about our network future, as you can probably tell. It's a place for vision and purpose, and it's where we can create those connections where we can make that unimaginable possible. So over the next few hours, share that vision and enjoy the day. And I'm sure as you hear from a range of speakers and panelists, we'll discover a whole new world of those possibilities. And I look forward to rising to the challenge of setting that foundation for what's possible tomorrow. Thank you.
Wow, Katherine, thank you very much for what I think was a fascinating sort of personal insight into the role of technology, from the current practical uses of drones and digital to conduct site visits, as well as a glimpse of the future uses of it, and of course the incredible strains that those new technologies will place on networks, and how we can and have to respond to the stresses that will bring about, as well as of course what this means for our next panel session.